on the modest side. So let's get the reactions also here. Joining me and Sam, the political journalist Isabel Oakeshott and Graham Davies, who's an expert on political presentation. I was saying a little bit flat, perhaps.
Well, it was definitely him, definitely his own material that he'd written himself, but it was rather mundane and meandering by his high standards, and it's going to be more memorable for the pizza wheel of death and kangaroo's testicles than it is for any real substance.
We've heard all that before, though. I mean, they're pretty stale jokes.
Very stale. He was becoming an environmentally friendly politician, recycling his old material.
I was surprised how little there was on the EU in that speech. It felt at times to me much more like one of Boris's after-dinner speeches, quite kind of, as you say, quite meandering. The jokes were, you know, the language there were vintage Boris, and there were a few sort of slightly Trumpian flourishes when he started calling out people in the audience, members of his team. That's very much a sort of Trump-style thing. And, you know, you did very much get the sense that he wrote most of this himself. Where I think he faltered was on the more dull passages, the required homage to the NHS, which didn't come across particularly authentically, I didn't think.
I mean, a great sort of diversion into buses, and his love of buses, and his love of painting boxes of buses. And of course, no mention of the fact that the company that makes Boris buses, has actually gone into receivership this week.
He unfortunately almost played into the narrative stereotypical picture that we often have of Boris Johnson, of being someone who's very good at skating along the surface but hasn't really got much substance underneath it. It's almost as if in preparation for the new series he's become his own spitting image puppet a little bit too soon.
He did say, though, back on Brexit, the alternative is no deal. Very clear on that. And so where does that leave him? Where's his room to manoeuvre?
That's a good question. It's not entirely clear at this point in time. Boris Johnson in front of a crowd, giving them certainty.
And saying October the 31st.
And saying October the 31st, we'll leave with a deal or no deal, and this is, and here is my offer to get to that position. Of course, no such certainty exists. He's bound by legislation. He is having to go into a negotiation, and we do not know whether in a little over 30 days where we will be, whether it will be in an extension in no deal, or he'll have miraculously got some kind of deal. But what you could tell was that he was very much riffing off the audience's enthusiasm for no deal. There was call and response in quite a few bits of this speech, and one of the most enthusiastic call and responses was over no deal.
Took them a bit of a while to catch on that was going on, but they did a bit.
It did a bit, but the call and response when he was being pro-European, and there was a passage where he was saying that we are European, got decidedly less enthusiasm for the people in the hall than the bit a page later where he made clear he was determined to leave without a deal. Not clear, legislatively, politically, how he does that, given the opposition legislation passed by Parliament last month, does appear to tie his hands for lots of ways around it, as they've been saying to people at this conference.
I mean, that call and response thing, the kind of pantomime, what do we want thing, that is very much Brexit Party rally. You know, I was really struck by that. They've clearly been watching those rallies, which are very much designed to appeal to a base, and, you know, as Sam said, it didn't always work there, and that was partly because of Boris Johnson's delivery. Sometimes he rushed out those lines so fast that you were actually not quite given time to respond.
This was a speech that had spontaneity very much into its DNA, but he could have done with some rehearsal and some sharpening and editing of those lines, because the call and response, frankly, it was a little embarrassing that it was greeted sometimes by a couple of seconds of rather tumbleweed silence. He was greeted almost like a sort of 1980s sales trainer that was desperately trying to get some interaction.
We perhaps got a softening of the line on negotiating stance with the European Union. What we didn't get any softening on was really fierce attacks on Parliament.
No, the first section of this speech, and I actually thought the first third of the speech was a lot more bouncy than the last bit, and I think that the audience liked that, and it sort of jollied along. He was making a point that it is, in his view, the constitutional duty of the opposition to try and kick a Prime Minister out of office, and so it is absurd that they haven't agreed to Boris Johnson's demands for a general election, and that they should do so. On one level, that works politically, because it appears from the polling that many people would agree with that rather unusual stance. But on another, it's a reminder that in a different forum, in the Commons, of his weakness. He has a majority of -44. He cannot, despite being Prime Minister, get what he wants. So at the same time, on one level it worked politically, but on another level it does underline how Boris Johnson is, in his own words, running a zombie parliament, or a zombie government, because he has a zombie parliament that is stuck, and he is stuck with. Not to highlight.
And not necessarily attacks at that level the way to build a coalition to vote if he should actually bring back some sort of agreement.
Well, look, at this conference, one of the discussions you have with cabinet ministers from every wing of the party is if there should be that general election, which looks as if it could happen on November the 20th or maybe December the 5th, looks quite likely at the moment. If that happens, would the Conservatives win? And they all acknowledge that there will be difficulties in Scotland against the SNP, possibly difficulties in Remain vote leading areas, possibly in the southwest as well. The question is, can rhetoric like the stuff that we saw in the hall in the last hour attract those voters in Northern England, Leave voters, traditionally Labour voters? He will be hoping that that rhetoric in there delivers this kind of vote. The question is, will it? At the moment, we just simply don't know. OK, here at the Conservative Party conference, or the end of the Conservative Party conference here in Manchester, we're going to pause for a moment and come back in a moment with more discussion of Boris Johnson's